This simple sewing pattern shows you how to make reversible but gorgeous gift wrap ready to re-gift over and over again. To make reusable gift wrap, you are going to need 2 fabrics. Now these could be completely contrasting, a Christmas fabric with a birthday type fabric, or they could be coordinating like this, and when you've got a few you could wrap them different ways. You are also going to need a coordinating thread and some ribbon. I'm going to be using a mixture of pins, but I also like to use my quilting clips. I've got an iron and ironing board. And then I'm going to show you how to create your own pattern, either using pattern paper or plain paper, a pencil and a ruler. I'm going to be using my embroidery scissors to cut my threads. One of the easier ways to make your own pattern, especially when it's rectangular, is to use this squared pattern paper that you can buy. It's quite thin, which is good when you're pinning it to fabric, but these centimetre squares are marked on for you, so it's literally a case of just measuring how far across, in terms of counting squares, don't even need a ruler, that you would like your pattern piece to be, and then cutting that out with your craft scissors. Your reversible fabric wrap can be as big or as small as you would like it. So my pattern recommends 45 centimetres by 45 centimetres. For this particular video, I'm going to make mine a bit smaller so that you can see it on the camera a little easier, and obviously you could go significantly bigger if you wanted to. So it's a case of measuring 45 centimetres across and 45 centimetres down in this case, or I'm going to be doing mine today 30 centimetres by 30 centimetres. Another method you could use is using plain paper. So obviously A4 paper is very small. You could get A3 or A2 in the shops and get paper that is bigger. 2 different ways you could use it. You could either measure however big you wanted your fabric wrap to be. So this is too small for a wrap arguably, but let's say 20 centimetres. I'm just going to make a dot 20 centimetres down in a few places. So the 0 is at the edge, my 20 centimetres is there. I would then join those together, so then you've definitely got a straight line that is consistently 20 centimetres from edge to edge. You would then do the same along the line, so you're finding 20 centimetres, 20 centimetres, join those dots together, and then again with your craft scissors cut out your rectangle. So that's a second method of doing it. You could also use baking paper from the kitchen. That is really useful because it's super big and it's a good consistency as well. The third method you could use is if you know that your baking paper, for example, or in this case the sheet of paper, is a sensible size for you, you would take the corner of your paper over to the edge, make sure that corner tip is right in the corner, and then carefully press down. I would then flip it over and fold this to be in line with the cut edge that is underneath it, like that. So now if you cut along that edge there, you've then got a perfect square to use as your pattern piece as well. So whether you're using pattern paper, whether you are physically measuring it out with a ruler, or whether you are using the folding method, you need to create yourself a square pattern piece. Once you have a square pattern piece to the size that you would like, that can obviously be reused over and over again. So you're going to open your fabric out and then position your pattern piece on top. Now, as you can see, mine's just about wide enough. When you're positioning your pattern piece, avoid the selvage edge. Now this is actually a cut edge, so I could go right up against there, and that's a straight edge, so I can position it right up against there. But what we don't want is this side is the selvage edge, so you can just about make out on camera that there's about 1 centimetre of thicker fabric in this case, or sometimes you'll see tiny holes where it's been rolled up at the manufacturers, or it'll be a completely different colour, the band going down the side. So don't put your pattern piece on that bit, move it further in and position it from then onwards. You're then going to take your pot of pins and position that fabric piece in place. Now, because we want 2 of these, you could position your 2 pieces of fabric on top of each other straight away and do the 2 at the same time. So I'm just putting these ones in first. Because I'm not going to be cutting down here or across here, I just want those to hold it flat and in place. Whereas on these sides, where I am going to be cutting, I want to position a lot more pins. So I want them so that they are in line with the pattern, but they're not getting in the way of the cutting edge. So I don't want the pins to stick out over here because we're going to be cutting down this end here. The more pins you have, the more accurate your cutting will be, because you've not got gaps of fabric that are going to be flapping around as you cut. So you go all the way around your shape, unless you're like me and you have some edges that don't need cutting. And then with your fabric scissors, you're going to use the whole of that blade to cut. So I want you to open the blade nice and wide as you cut through that fabric. Little cuts like this are more likely to end up with a jagged edge, and your bottom of your blade rests against your table as you cut. So you will glide up the table, taking sensible cuts. Always cut away from yourself. So if I wanted to cut down this edge here, I don't want to cut sideways because it makes it a little less accurate. I will spin the fabric round. Now it's all pinned, everything stays in place. And I will cut up that long edge there. And I'll spin my fabric round and cut the next section up there. So either way, you need to cut 2 pieces of fabric, a square from either your patterned fabric and a plain, or from 2 coordinating fabrics. I have 2 squares of fabric and 2 pieces of ribbon. So on the pattern, I've mentioned that this is 45 centimeters by 45 centimeters, and I cut 2 pieces of ribbon that were 50 centimeters long each. If you've adapted the pattern, so this one is actually smaller, I'm doing a 30 by 30 so that it can fit on camera for you and you can still see close up what I'm doing. I basically need you to have a piece of ribbon that goes diagonal to diagonal. Over halfway I would say is better, so cut it somewhere over here. So this particular one I think is also 30 centimeters long. To construct your reversible fabric wrap, you're going to position one piece of fabric right side up, and then you are going to lay the ribbon pieces so that they slightly overlap that corner edge and they are aiming at the other corner. So one from that top left corner, and then I'm going to match it by doing one from the bottom right. So again, it's overlapped that corner slightly so that I make sure I catch it when I'm doing my sewing. And then once those pieces are in place, you're just going to add the contrasting fabric over the top. So if this were a patterned fabric, this would be lying down right side down over the top. So this is right side up, which means the nice side of the fabric. Wrong side is down. So first piece of fabric right side up, the second piece of fabric right side down. All the nice sides of the fabric should be hidden inside. In the case of the fabric I'm using, there is no right or wrong, so I'm just positioning that over the top. Make sure that all of your outer edges line up, and then we'll pin and clip everything in place. The first thing I need to remember is to leave a gap when I'm sewing. So I'm going to do that by popping a pin at the top and another one roughly a hand width away from it. Doesn't need to be too big. So we're leaving this as a gap at the top. To mark that as different, I'm then just going to use my clips to go around the edge. Now if you don't have clips or don't want to use two different ways, for example, another way to mark a gap could be to double pin and double pin right next to each other. Just then it looks different, so that you know that something different is happening at that point. Another way I like to use is a fabric marker. I like the heat erasable ones, so that when I run the iron over the top, the pen disappears. So you could just make a slight mark either side and then pin the rest of your project around. Now you may or may not have noticed, as I've gone round, where there is ribbon, I have made sure that I've clipped that ribbon in place. I did the same at this bottom corner as well, just to make sure that the ribbon doesn't move as I'm sewing. Now at the sewing machine, I'm going to start on the far side of the gap where I'm not sewing. So I'll be putting this into the machine this way. I'm going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So that's the distance from the needle to the edge of the fabric. I'll show you at the machine in a moment. And I'm going to reverse sew up to my gap, up to my pin, and then I'm going to sew, sew, sew up to the top, sew across, sew down to the needle and reverse stitch to secure. So it's reverse, sew, 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 reverse. At the corners, I'm going to put my needle down so that I can pivot in one position. Let's do that together. Before I start sewing any project, I like to make sure that I have the top thread and the bottom thread, or the bobbin thread, talking to each other nicely. So I tend to just use an offcut of fabric, folded it in half so it replicates the 2 layers that I will be sewing. I've lowered the presser foot, and then I'm just going to take some stitches. What I'm looking for is that the top looks like stitches and not a bumpy line or a loopy line, and at the back the same is the case. So that's got trapped, but that's nothing to do with the stitches. I have some consistent stitches going across, so that way I know my thread tension is right. If it's not right and you've got a straight line or anything loopy, then rethread your machine. 9 times out of 10 that will solve your problem for you. So as I said, we are going to start at the gap. Find my gap here. I'm going to position it so that this top pin is behind. I'm starting at the edge of the gap. I'm using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, so it's just slightly wider than my presser foot, and I'm going to remove my pin so I don't hit it with the needle. So once I'm in position with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, or a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance if that's the marking you have on your machine, you're going to reverse stitch. So for me, I have a reverse stitch button. When I press and hold it, when I sew, I will go backwards for a few stitches. When I let go, it will start going forwards. It might be on your machine you have a lever and you need to press it down firmly. That will do your reverse stitch for you, and then when you let go, you'll be back to going forwards. So we're going to sew to the corner, stop and take pins out or clips as you need to, but don't take them out too soon. And then when I'm a centimetre away from the corner, I'm going to drop the needle down into the fabric. So on my machine I have a needle down button, but on lots of machines you're going to need to wind your side wheel towards you to drop that needle into the fabric. You can lift, spin, make sure that you're lined up with your 1 centimetre again. So if you've got too big a gap this time, you could go back if you wanted to and do 1 more stitch. Likewise, if it wasn't big enough, you could go back and reverse stitch to take you back to the right position. So lift, spin, trap, and then sew down to the next corner. Now at this corner I have ribbon. I can see that it's sticking out, which is great. If I can't see it, it may have slid inside, and that's not a great thing. So just unclip, reposition your ribbon if you need to. But when you get to that corner, make sure you stop 1 centimetre away from the edge. Drop your needle down by winding your wheel forwards. Lift, spin, trap your fabric again and sew. Continue all the way round till you reach the other edge of your gap. Once done and you've still got the gap, remove your project and then cut your threads over to the side. What you would like to see is 2 lengths of thread through tails of thread underneath here and out the back. If you cut your project too close to your needle, it will unthread when you next start sewing, and that can be frustrating. So there you have it, 1 centimetre seam allowance all the way round with a gap in one long edge. My reversible gift wrap is nearly done. I have sewn all the way around the edge, I've left my gap. Now I just want to, before I turn this through, trim my corners. Now if you imagine when we turn this through the right way round, all of this fabric here is going to have to try and squeeze into that small section there. So because that's quite tricky and will result in messy corners, what we do is we cut away the excess fabric without going through the stitches themselves. We don't want to create a hole, we just want to reduce the amount of bulk going into that space. So at all 4 corners you are going to cut off the excess fabric and then turn your project through the hole that you had left behind earlier. So use your fingers to push that fabric up through the hole and then find those corners and make sure they end up a square corner. So the way I like to do this, 2 different ways. If you don't have a useful little tool, you can get your finger or your hand in that gap and just find the corner and stick your finger up into that corner. Now we don't need it to be a angular corner because we've got the ribbon there, so I am expecting it to be nice and straight at the corner. The other way, if you don't want to use your finger, it might be that you have one of these tools or a chopstick and you can just slide that into your project. This is a corner turner, so it's made for just teasing out that corner without being too sharp that it sticks through. So whatever method you prefer to use, you need to get those corners nice and angular. What we don't want is any of this. So I'll find my gap, go in with my corner turner. I'm just going to poke around, easing that fabric into the corner space. So we now have our fabric the right side out, and we're just going to carefully roll that fabric underneath our fingers so that the sewn edge is right on the edge. You'll do that for all 4 sides and kind of finger press, and then use the iron to make it flat. You want a really crisp seam. Now the place you need to pay particular attention to is where your hole is. So at the moment I have a hole there, but if I get that fabric right to the edge, we don't want to lose the shape of the square, so we do want it to be there. But if you have a look inside, I should have 1 centimetre folded in for the top piece and the bottom piece. Finger press it flat and then use your iron to create a neat crease. So I wouldn't move your iron around too much because you'll potentially distort that seam allowance. But that has made it beautiful so that we can do our top stitching nice and easily. I'm just going to put a few clips in place just to make sure that that open seam allowance doesn't move as I continue to iron and when I top stitch in a moment. So ironing this flat ensures that your next step is much easier. We're now going to top stitch all around the outside and then we're virtually done. So with particular attention being paid to the gap itself, with top stitching you are sewing instead of a 1 centimetre seam allowance. If we did that, then this hole would remain open and it would open up again. So we're going to use a narrower seam allowance, which is 0.5 centimetres, so that when we sew closer to the edge, we're actually sealing this hole up. At the same time, we're also making sure that in future this doesn't start to get a little bit like this and a bit messy when it's re-gifted over and over. So start along a straight edge rather than in the corner. I will probably start about here. Then you're going to sew all around the 4 sides back to where you started, overlap those first stitches slightly to secure them, and then reverse stitch to secure the stitches you've just done. So it's sew, 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 reverse. At these corners, what I'm going to do when it's an angled corner is I will probably follow the angle around. But if I start here, I'll show you that corner, and then these 2 are the simple corners that we've done previously. So my threads are underneath and hanging out the back, and previously I had my project over here when I was sewing. So this time, rather than the full centimetre, I'm actually going a little bit further in and sewing around from there. So I'm going to trap my fabric, start sewing down towards the corner, and then instead of that angled corner, just 1 turn, I'm going to put my needle down as previously. I'm going to lift, spin my fabric, but only a 45-degree angle. I want to follow the folded edge all the way round. So I'm going to needle down, lift, spin, trap and sew. As I go past the gap, as long as I am close to the edge with my top stitching, the gap will seal itself closed. And then at this corner where it has no ribbon, We are just stopping 1/2 centimetre away from the edge, lowering our needle down. Might just do one more stitch. Lower, lift, twist and trap. So it's lift, spin, trap and sew. Now that I'm back towards the start point was actually here, I'm just going to get both of those threads from the front and the back and move them out to the side so that they don't get trapped. And then I'm going to sew over the stitches I created at the start by 2 or 3 stitches, reverse to finish by 2 or 3 stitches. That way your stitches are secure at the start and at the end. Cut your threads right by the fabric itself so you've got no little tails coming off. If I show you from the back it would look easier. So you're just doing a top stitch around the edge with the corners of the ribbon looking a little more like that. Now the ends of ribbon can fray over time, which can ruin the look of your project. So what I'm going to ask you to do is carefully trim. It's quite nice if you do it on the diagonal piece of the ribbon end. And then do not do this without an adult present. If you are not an adult, I would ask an adult to do it for you. But it's nice to just singe the edges. So I would usually do this next to a sink in case there's any problems, or a bowl of water. In the studio space I just use a tiny night light, and all I'm doing is very quickly running that edge through the flame. It's as simple as that, no longer needed, and you'll actually feel that the edge has gone a little bit crispy. So that was a really quick swipe through the flame. I don't want to hold it there because I don't want the ribbon to set alight. So I cut diagonally across the ribbon. If I show you once again, I am just swiping quickly through that flame. That's all it needs, and that just creates a little hardened edge that no longer frays. I blow my candle out, so I'm not going to set anything else alight. But that is not to be done unless you are an adult. And there you have it. You have a beautiful double-sided fabric wrap that you can wrap up your gifts. So let me show you how I would use that. When using your gift wrap, what you're going to do is put the side that you would like on the outside showing right side down. So I'm going to flip mine over and keep the patterned paper on the outside. Patterned fabric, I should say. As this is only a super small fabric wrap, I'm just going to wrap these white labels. So to begin with, you take the edges that don't have any ribbon on and you wrap your box or whatever it is, your gift, over. Now at this edge, what I would like to do is tuck that under and have it like that. So this one I didn't tuck under, I just wrapped it around the edge. And then this corner, wrap it over but tuck that piece under. Then you're going to take your 2 side pieces and bring them up to the centre. Now arguably this box is a little bit too small for this wrap. You're then going to tie a bow. So I've crossed those 2 ribbons over, feed that ribbon underneath, and I'll give it a pull. Almost like creating a knot to start with. And then I'm going to do the same again so that I have a knot on the top. So I crossed those 2 ribbons over, push one end through and give that a pull. So at the moment I've got the start. To create your bow, you're just going to loop one piece, wrap this piece around the edge of your bow, and then where you have this gap, you're going to feed that through and pull. So you could try investigating with different lengths of ribbon, you could try different widths of ribbon, and then once you're done you just tidy it up by tucking the excess fabric inside. Just imagine if you had some facing outwards, some facing the other way, it can then be re-gifted to someone else, they can wrap something different. Gorgeous. As ever, if you've liked this tutorial, you're very welcome to find more on my website at oodlesofcraft.com. Click on freebies, there are lots more freebies there for you to try. If you'd like to use one of my paid patterns, obviously that would be a dream. There are lots of gorgeous patterns on my website that you can check out as well. So that's oodlesofcraft.com, and if you follow me here on YouTube, you'll be notified as soon as the next video goes up. Happy sewing!